Wall Street has always been a game of gods, and for over a century and a half, Lehman Brothers was one of its primary temples. Having survived the American Civil War, the Great Depression, and 2 world wars, Lehman wasn't just a bank. It was a cornerstone of the global financial system. By 2006, the firm managed over $600 billion in assets and reported record profits of $4 billion a year. It was deemed completely immortal. But in September 2008, that immortality vanished in exactly 7 days. This wasn't a slow decay. It was a sudden, violent heart attack of the global economy. This is a minute-by-minute autopsy of the most catastrophic week in modern financial history. A story of how unbridled pride, bad math, and a fatal 168-hour countdown broke the world. To understand how Lehman died in 7 days, we must first look at the toxic trap they spent a decade building. In the early 2000s, the US government slashed interest rates to an unprecedented 1%. This flooded the market with cheap cash. Wall Street became hungry for bigger profits, and they found them in the American suburban home. The strategy was brilliant on paper, but dangerous in reality. Investment banks like Lehman began buying up thousands of home loans. They bundled them together into complex investment packages called mortgage-backed securities. Even though these packages were packed with subprime loans, meaning loans given to homebuyers with terrible credit and no verified income, the rating agencies looked the other way. They stamped these toxic packages with AAA ratings, claiming they were as safe as government bonds. Lehman's CEO, Dick Fuld, nicknamed the Gorilla, pushed the firm to the absolute extreme. By 2007, Lehman was operating at a staggering leverage ratio of 31-to-1. This meant for every $1 of actual cash Lehman held in reserve, they had $31 of borrowed money riding on the housing market. With this kind of extreme math, if housing prices dropped by just 3.3%, the bank would lose everything and go completely broke. And in 2007, the housing bubble burst. Subprime borrowers defaulted in droves, and housing prices went into a freefall. By late 2007, a quiet panic swept through Wall Street. Banks realized they didn't know how much worthless real estate debt their competitors were holding. The overnight lending market, the invisible plumbing where banks loan cash to each other to keep running, completely froze. Lehman was left holding tens of billions of dollars in toxic real estate assets they could neither sell nor borrow against. The trap was set. Day 1. The final week begins with blood in the water. For months, Lehman had been in desperate talks with the state-owned Korea Development Bank for a multi-billion-dollar cash lifeline to save the firm. But on Monday morning, news leaks that the talks have completely collapsed. Panic erupts. Short sellers, investors who profit when a company fails, Lehman's stock price plunges 15% in a single day. Day 2. The bleeding turns into a massacre. Lehman's stock loses a catastrophic 45% of its value in a single day. Hedge funds and big clients realize Lehman is running out of money. They begin pulling billions of dollars out of the bank to protect themselves. It is a modern, digital bank run. Dick Fuld remains defiantly confident, refusing to sell the company at a discount. He is convinced the government will step in and rescue them. He is dead wrong. Day 3. Desperate to calm the markets, Lehman takes a radical step. They rush out their third-quarter financial results days ahead of schedule. The numbers are a horror show. Lehman reports a staggering $3.9 billion net loss, driven by $5.6 billion in toxic real estate losses. Fuld tries to announce a survival plan, but the market realizes the bank's vault is empty. Day 4. The credit rating agencies issue an ultimatum. If Lehman doesn't find a buyer immediately, its credit score will be downgraded to junk status. This would force Lehman to hand over billions in collateral it simply doesn't have, resulting in instant death. In Washington, Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson and Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke watch with absolute dread. They realize Lehman's cash is evaporating by the hour. If Lehman goes under, it could pull down the entire global financial system. Day 5. The work week ends, but the real crisis begins. The government summons the CEOs of every major Wall Street bank to an emergency weekend meeting. Hank Paulson lays down a brutal ground rule. The government will not bail out Lehman Brothers. Wall Street must find a private buyer or prepare for economic chaos on Monday morning. Day 6, the plan completely fractures. Bank of America walks away from the table after discovering that Lehman's books are a black hole of hidden debt. Instead, they pivot and buy Merrill Lynch. Lehman's last hope rests entirely on Barclays. Day 7, the end game. On Sunday morning, the Barclays deal is ready, but suddenly, a phone call from London kills it. The British government steps in and blocks the purchase, refusing to guarantee Lehman's debts. The deal is dead. Lehman Brothers is entirely out of time and out of money. The message from the US government is stark. File for bankruptcy before the stock markets open in Asia or face total liquidation. At exactly 1:45 a.m. on Monday morning, Lehman Brothers officially files for bankruptcy. It remains the largest corporate collapse in human history, leaving behind a staggering $613 billion in debt. On Monday morning, the true human cost of the collapse hit the streets of Manhattan. 26,000 employees worldwide realized they no longer had a job. People who had dedicated 30 or 40 years of their lives to the firm walked out of the building carrying cardboard boxes. A global empire had vanished over a weekend, leaving its regular workers to face immediate ruin, while the executives who built the trap walked away with hundreds of millions in past bonuses. When Lehman Brothers broke, it pulled the pin on a global economic grenade. Because the modern financial system is entirely interconnected, the sudden destruction of a $600 billion giant caused global lending to lock up instantly. Banks stopped trusting other banks. On Monday, the American stock market dropped 504 points. Within weeks, global stock markets lost an unfathomable $10 trillion in value. The fallout was cataclysmic, officially triggering the Great Recession. The crisis wiped out 8.8 million jobs in the United States alone, and over 6 million Americans were evicted from their homes as foreclosures swept the nation. Trillions of dollars in hard-earned retirement savings were permanently erased, delaying retirement for an entire generation. To prevent a total collapse of civilization, the US government executed a massive, highly controversial $700 billion taxpayer bailout of Wall Street, doing for Lehman's competitors what it refused to do for Lehman itself. The collapse taught us a terrifying, permanent truth: that the massive global economic engines we rely on are fundamentally fragile, held together entirely by the invisible thread of trust. And when that trust is broken by greed and leverage, it takes just 7 days to break the world. If you want to understand the high-stakes mechanics of the financial systems that rule our world, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Click on our next documentary to see how the world's biggest brands operate behind closed doors. Thanks for watching.